times have you, or, maybe someone started a brand new fitness routine with just the absolute best of intentions, only to completely abandon it a few weeks later?
Oh, man. Yeah. The classic New Year's resolution trap.
Right. January 1st rolls around, you buy the expensive new running shoes, you sign up for that premium gym membership.
And you meal prep out of those little plastic containers for exactly 3 days.
Yes, exactly 3 days. And then by mid-February, the gym bag is just gathering dust in the trunk of your car. We have all been there.
Oh, absolutely.
And when that happens, what is our immediate reflex? We blame ourselves. We say we lack willpower. We label ourselves as lazy. We internalize this massive sense of failure.
We just assume we don't have the discipline to be a healthy person.
Right. But what if that entire narrative is fundamentally wrong? What if the real issue isn't your willpower at all, but rather that the entire approach to your fitness plan, the way you were instructed, or even instructed yourself, was just completely flawed from the very first step?
I mean, it completely reframes the concept of failure when we start looking at it through that lens.
It really does.
For decades, we've looked at the end result, the abandoned gym membership, the unused treadmill in the basement, and we automatically assume the user is broken. We almost never stop to consider that the prescription itself was built for the wrong person.
So true.
The whole fitness industry has historically operated on this very mechanistic model. It looks at the human body as a machine.
Input this, output that.
Exactly. It operates on the logic that if you want a specific physical outcome, you simply input these specific physical variables. But if you actually dig into the behavioral science, into the psychology of how humans adopt new habits, that mechanistic approach just falls apart completely.
Because we aren't machines.
Right. True success in changing a lifestyle habit doesn't come from a perfect spreadsheet of sets and reps. It comes from integrating the physical, emotional, and social realities of the individual.
Which makes so much sense. I mean, think about the standard fitness prescriptions out there. The generic 30-day workout plans you download off a fitness influencer's page, or that printed sheet you get handed by a floor trainer on day one at a commercial gym.
The one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah. Walking into a gym and taking one of those plans is exactly like walking into a massive department store and buying a generic off-the-rack suit.
Right, sure.
I mean, sure, it's technically a suit, it covers your body, but the sleeves hang down past your wrists, the shoulders restrict your movement, and you just feel incredibly awkward and self-conscious wearing it.
So what happens? You hang in the back of your closet and you never put it on again.
Exactly. And then you blame yourself for not having the right body for the suit.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are unpacking today in this deep dive is the behavioral science equivalent of going to a master tailor.
I love that analogy.
Right. A master tailor doesn't just throw fabric at you. They measure your exact dimensions. They sit down and ask you where you'll be wearing the suit, whether you run hot or cold, how much you travel.
What fabrics make your skin itch?
Yes. They do all of this before they ever even touch a pair of scissors. So to understand how to build that custom suit, we have to look at the sources for today's deep dive, which focus on client-centered exercise prescription and the activity counseling model.
And that tailor analogy perfectly captures the core philosophy of what behavioral scientists call that client-centered approach.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, to truly understand how to build that custom suit for someone or even for yourself, we first have to dissect why the traditional methods of communication in the health and fitness world fail so consistently.
The way trainers actually talk to people.
Exactly. It almost always comes down to the style of counseling or the conversational dynamic that the professional forces onto the individual. When you look at the research, you can categorize people seeking change into a matrix.
Okay, what kind of matrix?
It's based on their physical ability and their psychological confidence. So you have people who are unable and insecure, people who are unable but highly confident, people who are able but insecure, and those who are both able and confident.
That covers basically everyone.
Right. And in response to these different humans, the industry typically defaults to one of 4 primary communication styles: the preacher, the director, the educator, and the counselor.
Okay, the preacher style sounds immediately problematic. I hear that word and I instantly think of the guilt trip approach to health.
Because that is exactly what it is. The preacher style relies on delivering these moralistic mini lectures on healthy behaviors. It's the trainer or the well-meaning friend telling the person what they really should be doing.
You should eat more greens. You should do more cardio.
Right. The underlying mechanism here is judgment. When you preach, you instantly establish a psychological hierarchy. You position yourself as the moral authority, the one who possesses the virtue, and you position the client as the sinner who needs saving.
Which just instantly triggers defiance. I mean, if someone talks to me like that, my immediate human instinct is to cross my arms, shut down, and find a reason why they're wrong.
Even if they are factually correct about the vegetable.
Oh, totally. I don't care if they're right. I'm mad.
Precisely. It triggers a defensive ego protection mechanism. It just completely destroys any potential for rapport. Now, behavior researchers do note that a very brief burst of the preacher style, maybe a quick, enthusiastic endorsement, can occasionally infuse a burst of energy if the person is already highly receptive.
Like hype man.
Yeah, exactly. But relying on it as a primary method for fostering sustainable behavioral change is completely counterproductive. It breeds resentment, not motivation.
Okay, so preaching is out. Let's look at the next one, the director. This is the person who gives specific prescriptive guidance, right?
Yes. They design the program, they demonstrate the movement, and they explicitly tell you what to do.
Now, I actually have to push back on the idea that this is a bad thing. I mean, if I'm paying a premium rate for a personal trainer, isn't a director exactly what I'm paying for?
That's a very common reaction.
Like, I don't want to think about my workout. I want an expert to direct me so I can just turn my brain off and sweat tell me what to do.
That is the most common defense of the director style, and it highlights a massive tension in behavioral coaching. It is true that clients often vocalize a desire to simply be told what to do.
It removes the mental burden.
It does. It feels efficient.
Yeah.
The trainer asks a few quick questions, writes a program, points to the dumbbells, but we have to separate what a person wants in the short term from what will actually make them successful in the long term.
Okay, what's the catch?
The danger of the director style is that it fundamentally ignores the client's internal world. If you just act as a director, you are handing them the off-the-rack suit.
Ah, I see.
You might design a biomechanically flawless workout, but because you didn't create a dialogue about their personal lifestyle preferences, their hidden insecurities, or their daily schedule, the program is incredibly brittle.
So the moment life gets hard, it breaks.
Exactly. The moment it encounters friction in the real world, the client abandons it because they have no psychological ownership over it. It's your plan, not theirs.
Wow. Okay. The efficiency is an illusion. You save time on the consultation, but you just lose the client a month later.
Spot on.
What about the educator? That sounds a bit more benign.
The educator is the data provider. This style relies on the assumption that the barrier to change is simply a lack of information.
So they just hand you pamphlets.
Pretty much. They provide relevant health data, explain the physiology of a squat, break down the metabolic pathways of aerobic exercise.
Which sounds helpful, right?
It can be. Some analytical individuals feel reassured by deep technical expertise, but the psychological flaw here is the assumption that humans are purely rational creatures.
Which we definitely are not.
Right. We almost never change our habits simply because we are handed a compelling spreadsheet. If information were the only requirement for health, nobody would smoke, and everyone would sleep 8 hours a night.
Oh, that's such a good point. We all know we should sleep more, but we just don't.
Exactly. When an educator overwhelms a client with anatomy textbooks, they are often just lecturing in a different, more academic way. It fails to address the emotional barriers.
Which leaves us with the fourth style, the one that actually works, the counselor.
Yes, the counselor style operates on a collaborative, problem-solving framework. Instead of dictating or lecturing, the counselor helps the individual make informed decisions by exploring their specific realities.
So it's a two-way street.
Entirely. The focus shifts away from the trainer's expertise and onto the client's needs. The goal is to empower the person to take control of their own process.
To understand the sheer gravity of choosing the wrong style, there is this incredible case study from the sources involving two different women trying to start a fitness journey.
Oh, the Suzanne and Marg cases, those are fascinating.
The contrasting outcomes illustrate this better than any theory could. Let's dive into Suzanne's story first, because it is honestly heartbreaking.
Suzanne's experience is a textbook example of the director style failing spectacularly. Suzanne was a woman in her mid-40s who was very self-conscious about her body. She reached out to a fitness professional for help.
And the trainer just completely misread the situation.
Well, the trainer operated with a genuine but misguided desire to fix the problem quickly. They bypassed any deep emotional assessment and went straight into building a physical prescription.
The off-the-rack suit.
Right. They designed what was, on paper, a highly creative and biomechanically sound home workout program. It involved lifting soup cans to strengthen Suzanne's arms and incorporated various jumping exercises to elevate her heart rate.
Sounds practical.
From a purely physiological standpoint, it checked all the boxes for an accessible, low-cost home routine.
But the program was a complete disaster, wasn't it? She did it for exactly 2 sessions and then completely ghosted the trainer.
She quit.
And when you find out why, it becomes so obvious why the director approach is dangerous.
Yeah. The trainer eventually ran into Suzanne by chance much later, and Suzanne discreetly pulled them aside to explain what actually happened.
What did she say?
She revealed 2 critical pieces of information that she had hidden during the initial consultation. First, after having given birth to 3 children, the jumping exercises in the program were causing severe urinary incontinence.
Oh my gosh. That is so humiliating.
She was far too embarrassed and ashamed to bring this up to a professional who was just briskly barking orders and writing down sets and reps.
Of course she was.
And second, she felt absolutely ridiculous and humiliated standing in her living room lifting soup cans.
Think about the psychological damage there. The trainer gave her a program that physically hurt her, caused a deeply embarrassing bodily reaction, and made her feel foolish in her own home.
It's terrible.
Of course she quit. And the tragedy is that the trainer probably thought Suzanne was just lazy. But the real failure was that the trainer never built enough of a relationship for Suzanne to feel safe, saying, "Hey, my pelvic floor can't handle jumping right now, and holding soup cans makes me feel like a cartoon character."
Exactly. The director style created an environment where vulnerability was impossible. The trainer was so preoccupied with the physical assessment that they never uncovered the hidden barriers.
Now look at the completely opposite approach taken with Marg.
Right, Marg. Marg was another client who presented with hypertension. She was significantly overweight, and she carried the heavy psychological baggage of multiple failed exercise attempts in the past.
She was terrified of gyms.
Terrified.
If a director got a hold of Marg, they would have thrown her on a treadmill, terrified her, and lost her in a week.
Oh, without a doubt. But the professional working with Marg adopted the counselor style. They recognized the fear radiating from her. Instead of immediately writing a prescription, the trainer scheduled multiple, much shorter meetings over a period of weeks.
Just to talk.
They didn't even touch a weight. They simply talked. They explored her past failures without judgment. They talked about her deep-seated embarrassment regarding traditional fitness environments.
Building trust.
The trainer spent all their energy building an architecture of trust. They worked collaboratively to figure out what Marg actually wanted to do, not just what her blood pressure readings dictated she needed to do.
And the intervention they came up with wasn't some complex gym routine.
Not at all.
The trainer invited Marg to join an annual staff hike in a beautiful, non-intimidating outdoor setting and casually paired her with a senior kinesiology student for a gentle walk. They just completely removed the clinical pressure.
And the result of that? By the end of that single afternoon, Marg felt so safe and empowered that she hired that student to walk with her over the summer.
That's amazing.
And she eventually transformed to a highly enthusiastic, consistent exerciser.
The core difference between Suzanne's failure and Marg's success wasn't the biomechanics of the exercises, it was the psychological focus.
Absolutely. With Suzanne, the focus was on the disease and the prescription. With Marg, the focus was entirely on the human being.
The counselor approach honors the reality that if you want to change someone's physical behavior, you first have to create a safe harbor for their emotional reality.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
So if the ultimate goal is to act as a counselor, whether you are coaching a client, trying to help your spouse get healthy, or even trying to negotiate with your own brain, how do you actually manufacture that safe harbor?
Because trust isn't something you can just demand.
Right. You can't just say, "Trust me, I am a counselor."
Yeah.
You have to build it through a very specific method of interaction. Which brings us to the foundational step of any behavioral change model, the mechanics of establishing rapport.
And using the word mechanics is key here, because listening is not a passive activity.
It's work.
It is an incredibly active, dynamic process. We generally walk around with a very juvenile understanding of communication. We think it operates like a simple transaction.
Yeah.
Person A speaks words, person B hears words.
Like passing a note.
Right. But behavioral models map this out as a complex loop with multiple points of failure. It begins with the speaker who initiates and encodes a message.
Encodes it.
Yeah, they don't just transmit pure thought. They have to translate their feelings into words, wrap those words in a specific tone of voice, and deliver them with specific body language.
And then that encoded message is sent across the space to the listener who has to receive and decode it.
Exactly. And the space between the speaker and the listener is an absolute minefield.
As that message travels, it has to pass through what psychologists call filters and noise.
This is where 90% of communication breaks down.
Let's talk about filters first.
Mental filters are the accumulation of our beliefs, our deeply held prejudices, and our past experiences. We all have them. They are how our brains make sense of the world.
But in a counseling environment,
They act as massive distortion lenses. If a client has a history of being mocked by gym teachers in high school, their mental filter is primed for criticism.
so they expect to be insulted.
Right. You might say, let's try adjusting your posture with the absolute best of intentions. But their filter decodes that message as, you are doing it wrong, you are clumsy, you don't belong here.
That is wild.
To be an effective listener, you have to be acutely aware of both your own filters and the client's, and consciously work to set yours aside to inhabit their perspective.
And if the filters aren't bad enough, you also have to contend with the noise.
Oh, the noise.
You have external noise, which is obvious. Like if you are trying to have a deep conversation about someone's body image insecurities on a bustling gym floor with heavy metal music blasting and people dropping barbells.
The external noise is going to destroy the vulnerability.
But the far more dangerous element is internal noise.
Internal noise is the constant distracting monologue running inside the listener's head. It can be anxiety about how you look, stress about a project at work, or even just physical discomfort like hunger.
So if you are sitting across from someone who is pouring their heart out,
But your internal noise is saying, I need to wrap this up because my next client is in 5 minutes. You are not actually listening. You were just waiting for your turn to speak.
I love visualizing this through an analogy. Think of the communication loop like a complex radio broadcast.
Okay, I like this.
The person speaking is the broadcast tower, sending out a beautifully clear, high-fidelity piece of music. That is the true message they are trying to convey. But the person listening is the radio dial in a car driving through a storm.
Oh, that's good.
If that receiver is tuned slightly off the frequency because of their own internal biases, their filters, and if there is lightning crashing around them, their internal noise, that beautiful song comes through as absolute garbled static.
They might catch the heavy bass notes, but they miss all the subtle lyrics.
Exactly. They miss the meaning.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. Your job as a counselor is to fine-tune that dial, to clear the static, so you can receive the high-fidelity signal.
And a massive part of tuning that dial is demonstrating to the speaker that you are completely physically present.
You have to communicate non-verbally that it is safe to keep talking. Behavioral scientists emphasize the concept of physical attending behavior.
Which is often taught through a very practical framework known with the acronym SOLAR. Let's break down SOLAR because it sounds so simple, but when you actually audit your own body language in daily conversations, you realize how rarely you do this.
It's harder than it looks.
Okay, the S stands for face the person squarely. Now, this doesn't mean you have to lock them into a rigid interrogational stare down, right?
No, not at all. You might sit at a slight angle to remove some of the confrontational pressure, but your torso, your physical energy, is directed squarely at them. It signals, I am fully here with you.
Got it. The O is critical. Adopt an open posture. This means deliberately uncrossing your arms and legs. Let's pause on the open posture because the psychology of crossed arms is profound.
It really is. Crossing your arms over your chest is an evolutionary subconscious defense mechanism. You are literally guarding your vital organs.
Even if you are just doing it because the room is slightly chilly.
Exactly. The primitive part of the speaker's brain reads that closed posture as resistance, skepticism, or a desire to distance yourself. An open posture physically communicates psychological openness.
It's amazing how much our primitive brains still dictate modern interactions.
We are still just animals at our core.
Okay, moving on. The L stands for lean toward the client. Not uncomfortably close, but a subtle lean forward demonstrates active involvement.
If you are leaning back in your chair, resting on your heels, it screams detachment. It looks like you are evaluating them rather than collaborating with them.
Right. And then the E stands for Maintain good eye contact.
Eye contact is fascinating because it is the ultimate barometer of your internal comfort level. A counselor's level of reluctance, anxiety, or distraction is immediately revealed by how consistently they can hold a gaze.
If someone is telling you something difficult and your eyes are darting to the clock,
The trust is instantly broken. However, it's a delicate balance. It must be natural eye contact, not an aggressive, unblinking stare, which can feel predatory.
don't stare through their soul. Which brings us to the final letter. The R stands for be relaxed. You can't be rigidly holding these postures like a robot. You have to breathe naturally.
If you are tense, the client's mirror neurons will pick up on that tension and they will become tense.
Wow, mirror neurons.
The solar framework is about aligning your physical presence with your psychological intent. But once you have tuned the dial with your body language, the real test arrives when you open your mouth.
The scary part.
How you respond to a client's struggles dictates whether you deepen the rapport or destroy it entirely. And this requires understanding the massive distinction between supportive communication and advice-giving communication.
This is where I think almost everyone fails. It is human nature to want to solve problems. When someone we care about comes to us with a complaint, our immediate overwhelming instinct is to hand them a solution.
We want to fix it.
We just want to fix
I
it.
want to fix it because fixing it makes us feel competent and valuable. But giving advice too early is devastating to rapport.
It really is.
Let's look at a scenario that plays out in gyms and clinics 1,000 times a day. Imagine a client who is part of a corporate wellness program comes in for a check-in.
Okay, setting the scene.
They sit down and say, well, my knee's still a little sore. I've been doing the rehab exercises and they're good. But I went out and played hockey with my kids on the pond over the weekend and the knee flared up again.
Oh man. If I am operating on pure instinct, my advice-giving brain immediately zeroes in on the cause of the pain. I would probably say something like, well, that's obviously the problem. The hockey is ruining the rehab. Why don't you just stick strictly to the program we designed and stop playing hockey until you're fully healed?
And if you said that, you would be technically, biomechanically correct.
But
But psychologically, you just committed a massive error. That response, while seemingly logical, is entirely devoid of empathy. You have completely ignored the human element of why they played hockey in the first place.
I didn't even think about the kids.
Exactly. You essentially just told a parent, stop engaging in spontaneous joy with your children because it is interfering with my perfectly optimized spreadsheet. You prioritize the knee over the person.
It's the preacher and the director mashed together into one terrible response.
Precisely. So how do we shift to a supportive response? Instead of condemning the behavior, a counselor validates the human desire behind it while still addressing the physical reality.
How does that sound?
A supportive response would sound like this. It sounds like playing hockey with your kids is really important to you. Do you think there is a way we can modify how you play to avoid the flare-up? Or is rest the absolute best option right now? By the way, I am really pleased to hear that you're keeping up with the rehab exercises. That shows great commitment.
The difference is staggering. It's night and day. In the supportive response, you first validate their values, spending active time with their kids. You acknowledge the positive effort they are putting in.
And most importantly, instead of dictating a solution, you invite them to collaborate on finding one.
Do you think there is a way we can modify it? You are treating them as the expert on their own life.
And maintaining that collaborative space requires immense discipline. You have to constantly fight the urge to make the conversation about yourself.
Oh, this part.
In counseling psychology, there's a major trap known as the autobiographical response.
I do this all the time without realizing it. Someone tells me a story, and I try to show empathy by telling a similar story about myself.
It is a very common attempt at connection, but it usually backfires in a coaching dynamic. If a client is bravely admitting, I'm just so overwhelmed, I can't seem to find the time to grocery shop or cook healthy meals.
An autobiographical response would be, oh, I totally get it. My schedule is insane right now, too. Yesterday, I was back to back with clients, and I literally ate a protein bar out of the vending machine for lunch.
It feels like commiserating, but you've actually just hijacked the microphone.
I stole their moment.
Exactly. You stole their moment of disclosure and made yourself the protagonist of the conversation. True active listening requires you to verify their feelings, not broadcast your own facts.
So what do I say instead?
Instead of sharing your schedule, you use clarifying and validating phrases. It sounds like you're feeling incredibly stretched thin right now, or I want to make sure I understand. Is it the time it takes to cook or the mental energy of planning the meals that feels overwhelming?
You act as a mirror, reflecting their reality back to them so they can see it more clearly.
Exactly.
So the grand takeaway here is that if you want to guide someone toward meaningful change, you have to build an architecture of trust. You have to clear the internal static, align your body language to show you are a safe harbor, and fiercely suppress the urge to preach, fix, or talk about yourself.
You validate the emotion before you ever attempt to modify the behavior.
And only once that profound level of trust is established are you ready to actually start gathering the data you need to build the plan. Which brings us to the next phase of the behavioral model, information gathering.
Right, because empathy is essential. But empathy alone doesn't build a workout program.
You need specifics.
You need specific, actionable coordinates. You need to know exactly how to tailor that suit. And the way behavioral specialists map out a person's life is through a fascinating framework that visualizes the client's reality as 3 intersecting spheres of existence.
If you can visualize a classic Venn diagram in your mind, 3 distinct circles overlapping in the center, this represents the entire landscape of human behavior change. The 3 circles are needs, wants, and lifestyle.
The fundamental rule of this framework is that the only sustainable path forward, the only area with genuine potential for long-term success, exists precisely in that tiny sliver in the middle where all 3 circles overlap.
Let's dissect these 3 spheres, because blurring the lines between them is exactly why so many people fail. Let's start with the hard reality, needs.
Needs are objective. They originate in human biology, biomechanics, and medical reality. Needs are what a physician or a physical therapist would identify on a chart.
Like blood pressure.
If you have clinical hypertension, you need cardiovascular conditioning. If you have severe osteoporosis, you need load-bearing resistance training to improve bone density.
But interestingly, behavioral models expand this category beyond just the physical.
They do. They also include educational needs and self-esteem needs. For instance, if someone has never been athletic, they don't just need to lift weights. They need foundational education on how their joints move before they can safely load them.
Okay, so needs are the non-negotiable requirements of the biological machine. But humans are not machines, which brings us to the second circle, wants.
Wants are entirely subjective. They are our desires, our preferences, our vanities, and our expectations.
The fun stuff.
While needs dictate what must happen physiologically, wants dictate how the individual prefers to achieve it. A client might objectively need to lower their body fat percentage to reduce cardiac risk, but their want might be the desire to look muscular and imposing.
Or to look slim and fit into a specific dress for a wedding.
Exactly. They might need aerobic capacity, but they want to achieve it by playing tennis, not by staring at a wall while running on a treadmill.
Wants are the emotional fuel that drives the engine.
If you ignore a person's wants and only prescribe what they need, you remove all their intrinsic motivation.
But even if you perfectly align the physiological needs with the emotional wants, there is a third circle that destroys almost every fitness resolution ever made. The apex predator of behavior change, lifestyle.
Lifestyle is the unforgiving reality of a person's daily existence. It encompasses their socioeconomic status, their cultural background, their career demands, their commute, their family obligations, their access to facilities, and their baseline stress levels.
I want to hammer this point home because it is the most common trap people fall into. Think about how often we sit down on a Sunday night feeling motivated and we design a plan that brilliantly connects what we need, like to lose 10 pounds, with what we want to feel strong and athletic.
The Sunday motivation surge.
We decide we are going to wake up at 5 a.m. every single day, drive 20 minutes across town to a CrossFit box, do an hour of grueling, high-intensity training, and eat nothing but boiled chicken and broccoli.
And that plan completely, utterly ignores the lifestyle circle.
Exactly. Because your actual lifestyle is that you have a 6-month-old infant who wakes up crying at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. You work a highly stressful 50-hour-a-week corporate job. You commute an hour each way. And your spouse relies on you to help with dinner.
It's just a fantasy.
If you try to force a 5-hour a.m. high-intensity workout into that lifestyle, the plan is doomed before the alarm clock even rings. It doesn't matter how much you need or want it, the lifestyle cannot sustain the friction.
When the lifestyle is fundamentally incompatible with the prescription, the lifestyle will always win. Always. That is why finding that exact point of intersection where all 3 circles overlap is paramount.
You have to find an activity that objectively improves their physical needs, objectively satisfies their emotional wants, and can actually be executed realistically within the chaotic structure of their current life.
So the million-dollar question is, how do you find that tiny point of overlap? You don't find it by just asking, so what are your fitness goals? You have to be incredibly strategic with your questions. You need to act almost like an investigative journalist.
This is a strategy.
You have to utilize a structured progression of questioning techniques. You always begin with what are known as open or broad questions. These are designed to be entirely non-threatening and non-prescriptive.
Establishing a wide perimeter.
You establish a wide perimeter and let the client wander within it. You might ask, when you envision your life 5 years from now, how do you see your health fitting into that picture? Or tell me about the last time you felt really good in your body.
These questions can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They yield rich, narrative, emotionally charged data.
But you can't just operate in the realm of broad philosophy forever. At some point, you need to map out the logistics.
That is when you deploy closed or narrow questions. These are the surgical tools used to verify accuracy and extract specific coordinates. You mentioned you want to improve your strength. Would you prefer using free weights, guided machines, or bodyweight calisthenics?
Or, given your current work schedule, how many days a week can you realistically commit to 30 minutes of activity without causing a crisis at home?
It operates exactly like a funnel. You cast a wide net at the top to understand the emotional landscape, and then you narrow down to the sharp point of logistical reality. But my favorite part of the psychological toolkit is what happens when a client gives you a superficial or defensive answer. You use probing strategies.
Probing is where the art of counseling truly shines. When someone gives you a surface-level response, you gently push them to analyze their own thinking. There are several ways to do this.
Give me some examples.
You can use clarification probes. You said you want to get toned. Can you describe for me what toned actually looks like to you?
Then you have critical awareness probes, which gently challenge assumptions. You mentioned you want to go back on that severe restriction diet from 5 years ago. Since you ended up regaining the weight back then, why do you feel it's the best strategy for you now?
That is such a delicate way to confront a bad idea without being a preacher. You make them articulate the flaw in their own logic.
And then there are perception probes, which I find brilliant.
Perception probes force the client to anticipate cause and effect. If a client insists they don't need to warm up before lifting heavy weights, instead of lecturing them on tendon elasticity, you ask, if you were to jump right into your heaviest squat without preparing the joints, what do you suspect might happen?
You let them vocalize the danger themselves. It's behavioral judo. You use their own momentum to guide them to the right conclusion. And there is one more linguistic tool that I think is absolute magic for bypassing human defense mechanisms: softening.
Softening is critical because direct questions, especially about failure or lack of discipline, can feel like an interrogation. If you ask someone directly, "Why aren't you motivated to exercise?" you instantly trigger shame, and shame breeds silence.
So how do you soften it?
Softening uses a third-person lead-in to completely remove the threat. Instead of pointing the finger at them, you universalize the struggle. You say, many of the highly successful people I work with struggle immensely to find the motivation to train after a long workday. What are some things that might help you overcome that hurdle?
Many people. It is such a beautiful trick. The moment you say many people struggle with this, you lift the burden of uniqueness off their shoulders. You tell them you are not broken, you're not a freak, you are just a normal human experiencing a normal human obstacle.
The relief they feel must be palpable. It creates instant psychological safety. And to ensure that this deep investigative work covers every possible base, behavioral specialists utilize comprehensive lifestyle audits. The most famous of these is the Fantastic Checklist.
Let's spend some time on this fantastic checklist, because when I first saw the categories it covers, I was genuinely shocked. We are talking about designing a fitness program, but this audit digs into areas of life that seem completely unrelated to dumbbells and treadmills.
It's acronym.
Right. F is for family and friends. A is for activity. N is for nutrition. T is for tobacco and toxics. A is for alcohol. S is for sleep, seatbelts, stress, and safe sex. T is for type of behavior. I is for insight. C is for career.
Look at the S category.
Yeah, a fitness professional asking a new client if they consistently wear their seatbelt or if they practice safe sex, that feels wildly intrusive. Why on earth does a personal trainer need to know that?
On the surface, it seems absurd. But remember the third circle of our Venn diagram: lifestyle. The Fantastic Checklist is designed to capture a panoramic snapshot of a person's overall biological and psychological stress load and their baseline risk tolerance.
So it's about stress.
The human nervous system does not differentiate between the physical stress of a heavy deadlift, the emotional stress of a toxic marriage, or the chronic anxiety of engaging in risky behaviors. It's all cumulative allostatic load.
So if someone comes in and their checklist reveals they are sleeping 4 hours a night, drinking heavily on weekends, highly stressed at their career, and engaging in risky physical behaviors without precaution,
Then their nervous system is already redlining. They are surviving on adrenaline and cortisol. If you, as a fitness professional, ignore that holistic reality and prescribe a high-intensity, central nervous system taxing workout program 6 days a week, you're not making them healthier. You're going to break them.
you are throwing gasoline on a fire.
The exercise will act as a destructive stressor rather than an adaptive one.
It completely reframes the job of a coach. You aren't just managing their muscles, you are managing their total systemic stress. The checklist isn't an interrogation, it's a map of their current bandwidth.
Precisely. The questions about seatbelts and safe sex are proxies for understanding how they value their own life and their propensity for reckless behavior. If they don't value their basic physical safety in a car, they are highly unlikely to value the slow, methodical safety required to rehab a shoulder injury. You have to know who you are dealing with.
Okay, this is a massive paradigm shift. We have established deep, non-judgmental rapport. We have used open questions, softening and probing to map out the exact intersection of their needs, wants, and lifestyle. We have audited their total systemic stress. We have all the data.
Sounds great.
Surely now we are ready to write the prescription and tell them what to do.
No. This is the exact moment where the vast majority of well-intentioned coaches and individuals trying to change their own lives drive the car straight off the cliff.
Wait, how is that possible? We have everything perfectly tailored.
You have the perfect map, but you haven't checked if the engine in the car is actually turned on. You have all the logistical information, but before you can implement a single strategy, you have to determine if the person is psychologically ready to change.
Oh, readiness.
You have to diagnose their exact mindset at this precise moment in time. And to do that, behavioral psychology relies on one of the most robust frameworks ever developed, the trans-theoretical model, specifically the stages of change.
This framework is an absolute revelation. When you understand the stages of change, human behavior suddenly stops looking like random chaos and starts looking highly predictable.
It was postulated by researchers Prochaska and DiClemente, and it serves as the central pillar of addiction and lifestyle counseling. The core philosophy is beautifully simple. People start things only when they are fundamentally ready to start them.
Which seems obvious, but we ignore it.
Our role is not to drag them across the starting line against their will. Our role is to accurately recognize exactly where they are on the spectrum of readiness and apply the specific psychological intervention that matches that exact stage. The model identifies 5 distinct sequential stages of change.
Let's break these down with surgical precision, because diagnosing the wrong stage guarantees failure. Stage 1 is the absolute baseline, pre-contemplation.
Pre-contemplation is characterized by one defining trait. The individual has absolutely zero intention of making a behavioral change in the foreseeable future. They have very low awareness that a problem even exists, or they are actively in denial about it.
Just a brick wall.
But the most critical psychological marker of a pre-contemplator is how they weigh the scales of change. In their mind, the cons, the costs, and the discomfort of changing massively outweigh any potential pros or benefits.
This is the person who smokes a pack a day and aggressively defends it by saying, "My grandfather smoked unfiltered cigarettes until he was 92 years old. It's all genetics, leave me alone." They are walled off.
Exactly. They are immune to logical persuasion. And there's a phenomenal real-world case study in the behavioral literature that illustrates how to handle this. It involves a man named Jerry.
Right, Jerry.
Jerry was rehabilitating from a severe motor vehicle accident. He had absolutely no history of being physically active, he hated the clinical environment, and he was firmly, deeply entrenched in the pre-contemplation stage.
So what do you do with it, Jerry? If he doesn't want to change, and the costs outweigh the benefits in his mind, aren't you just wasting your time? Do you just wait for him to suffer a secondary health crisis and hope it scares him into caring?
If you approach him like a director, yes, you will fail. The professional working with Jerry noted explicitly, "If I had simply assigned him an exercise prescription based on his physical rehab needs, I would have set him up for total failure. I knew he had not yet made the internal commitment to take action."
So you can't just give him a to-do list.
You cannot give a pre-contemplator a to-do list. They will throw it away. Instead, you have to engineer an environment that changes their perception.
So what did the professional do?
The professionals stopped talking about exercise entirely. They focused 100% of their energy on simply being a reliable, non-threatening presence. They built a relationship devoid of pressure. And then a moment of serendipity occurred.
What happened?
While Jerry was in the facility, the gear mechanism on a complicated piece of rehab equipment broke. Jerry, it turned out, had extensive background knowledge in mechanics. He stepped up and fixed the machine. The professional immediately recognized the opportunity and heavily, authentically praised Jerry for his expertise.
They validated his competence in an environment where he felt incompetent.
Exactly. That single isolated episode gave Jerry a massive surge of empowerment. It fundamentally shifted his perception of the clinical fitness environment. It went from being an intimidating place where he was a broken patient to a place where he had value, where his skills were respected.
That is so smart.
That tiny shift in self-efficacy was the exact catalyst required to move him out of pre-contemplation and into the next phase. You don't argue with a pre-contemplator. You help them discover their own efficacy.
That is a masterclass in psychological subtlety. Okay, so Jerry experiences a shift. He moves into stage 2, contemplation.
Contemplation is where the mental gears actually start turning. The individual is now consciously considering making a change, typically intending to do something within the next 6 months.
Okay, so they're thinking about it.
However, the defining characteristic of this stage is profound ambivalence. They finally see the pros of changing, but they still acutely feel the heavy cons. They're sitting perfectly balanced on the fence, often plagued by low self-confidence regarding their ability to actually pull it off.
This is the universal I know I really should but stage. I know I should start working out but. And what usually follows that but is the most common defense mechanism in human history.
Time. The literature consistently notes that the number one excuse for individuals stuck in the contemplation stage is, I know I need to exercise, but I just do not have the time in my schedule.
It is the ultimate shield because it feels undeniably true to them. So how does a counselor dismantle the time excuse without sounding dismissive?
You don't dismantle it by arguing logistics. A poor trainer, a director, would pull out a schedule and argue, well, everyone has the same 24 hours. You just need to wake up at 4:30 a.m. or stop watching Netflix.
Which just makes them feel attacked.
That invalidates their reality and triggers resistance. A counselor approaches it entirely differently. They start with radical validation. They look at the client's chaotic schedule and say, looking at everything you manage between your career and your family, I'm genuinely amazed at how much you accomplish in a single day. You clearly have your priorities heavily invested in providing for your loved ones.
You align yourself with their identity as a hard worker. You don't call them lazy, you validate their exhaustion.
And then once they feel seen and respected, you execute the reframe. You shift the paradigm of what exercise actually is. You say, given how much energy your life demands, what if we stopped looking at a 20-minute walk as another chore to squeeze into your day and started looking at it as a strategy for rejuvenation? What if those 20 minutes actually create more mental energy to help you handle all those priorities?
That is brilliant. You reframe the behavior from a tax on their time to an investment in their energy capacity. You change the currency. That is how you tip an ambivalent contemplator off the fence. Which brings us to stage 3, preparation.
Preparation is a very fragile, exciting stage. The individual has tipped off the fence. They intend to take definitive action in the immediate future, usually within the next 30 days.
So they're getting ready to move.
You will often see them making small, somewhat erratic behavioral changes. They might finally go buy the new running shoes. They might take the stairs at work 1 day a week. They are highly motivated, but the critical danger here is that they often carry the ghosts of past failures. They've likely tried to change in the past year and failed, so their confidence is shaky.
They are standing on the very edge of the high dive, looking down at the water. They want to jump, but they are terrified.
Yes, and the absolute worst thing you can do to someone in the preparation stage is overwhelm them. The literature strongly warns that booking a massive, rigorous 2-hour physical assessment and handing them a complex 6-day-week training matrix at this stage is way too threatening.
It will paralyze them.
The goal here is to secure a commitment to the smallest, most manageable plan possible. You want to set a short-term goal that is almost impossible to fail at, like simply learning a 5-minute mobility warm-up they could do in their living room. You build the habit of success before you demand the habit of exertion.
Build the foundation before you build the house. And once they take that leap, they enter stage 4, action.
Action is the stage everyone obsesses over. It is when the individual is actively, consistently engaging in the new behavior, and they have been doing so for less than 6 months.
This is when they're actually going to the gym.
But what people fail to realize is that the action stage is incredibly vulnerable. The risk of sudden relapse is at its absolute highest here. The novelty of the new shoes has worn off, the initial motivation has faded, and now it just feels like hard work.
This is mid-February. The gym parking lot starts emptying out.
Exactly. In the action stage, the individual requires massive amounts of support. They need their environment carefully managed so they are constantly challenged, but never completely overwhelmed. And most importantly, they need help changing their underlying identity to match their new behavior. They need to transition from saying, "I am trying to run," to "I am a runner."
Praise is absolutely critical here, right? But you have to be careful not to push them too fast. The literature mentions a client named Tony who was in the action stage. He was doing great with his supervised workouts, but his trainer, Josie, got overzealous.
Right, she pushed too hard.
She saw his progress and abruptly tried to transition him to a completely independent routine, assuming he was ready to fly solo.
And Tony panicked. He felt abandoned. He wasn't ready to internalize the motivation yet. He still relied on the external structure Josie provided. Josie pushed him toward the final stage prematurely, and it nearly caused a total relapse.
Which highlights how delicate that transition is into the final destination. Stage 5, maintenance.
Maintenance is the holy grail of behavioral change. An individual enters maintenance when they have consistently sustained the new behavior for 6 months or longer. Their self-confidence is incredibly high.
They've made it.
They have encountered friction vacations, illnesses, stressful work weeks, and they have successfully navigated those lapses without abandoning the habit. The behavior has become deeply ingrained and self-reinforcing. At this point, if they don't exercise, they actually feel physiologically and psychologically worse. The habit now requires less energy to maintain than it does to stop.
So the grand overarching thesis for you listening to this is profound. If you attempt to apply an action stage strategy like a rigid daily workout calendar and meal prep routine to a person who is operating with a contemplation stage mindset, someone who is still terrified and ambivalent, you will trigger massive explosive resistance.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot treat a pre-contemplator like an action taker. You have to court the human mind through the stages sequentially.
It is the equivalent of proposing marriage on the first date. It lacks all situational awareness. But let's assume we have done everything perfectly. We built rapport, we mapped the lifestyle, and we accurately diagnosed that the client is solidly in the preparation stage, ready to commit.
Okay, what's next?
Now, and only now, do we arrive at step 3 of the counseling model, establishing strategies and SMART goals.
It is finally time to build the actual suit. But even here, behavioral science doesn't just hand over a list of exercises. It requires a brutally honest accounting of what this change is going to cost the person. And they use a specific tool for this called the Decision Balance Summary.
The Decision Balance Summary is where abstract motivation meets the harsh friction of reality. It is an analytical tool where the client is forced to explicitly write down not just the anticipated gains of the new behavior, but the concrete losses they will suffer.
They have to write down the bad stuff.
And crucially, it demands that they analyze these gains and losses, not just for themselves individually, but how the change will impact their family, their spouse, and their social circle.
This is where the fantasy of getting fit collides with the reality of daily life. Let's look at the incredible example of Carol provided in the behavioral case studies. Carol is a 42-year-old mother of 2, working a busy job, trying to reclaim her health.
When Carol fills out her Decision Balance Summary, the gains column is powerful and obvious. She writes, "I may finally lose the weight I've carried since my last pregnancy. My daily energy levels should significantly increase, and I will fundamentally be a less stressed, happier, more patient person for my family to be around."
Those are massive life-altering wins. But the genius of the counselor model is that it forces Carol to look at the dark side of the ledger. The losses column is just as heavy, if not heavier, because the losses are immediate while the gains are in the future.
Exactly. Under losses, Carol writes a profoundly honest reality. If I commit to working out after my shift, I may miss transporting my kids to some of their after-school events, and my husband is going to have to take on the burden of preparing dinner on those nights.
This is the real world. A preacher or a director would look at Carol and say, "No excuses. Your health is more important than soccer practice. Your husband can figure out how to boil pasta."
But a counselor understands that the guilt of missing her kids' events and the potential marital friction of dumping chores on her husband are the exact things that will cause Carol to quit in week 3.
If you don't neutralize the losses will neutralize the program. So the strategy isn't just about picking the right treadmill speed, it's about soothing the lifestyle friction. The counselor works with Carol to develop explicit strategies. To mitigate the marital friction, the strategy becomes: take your husband out for dinner this weekend, separate from the chaos of the house, and have a deeply honest conversation. Explain how critical this health journey is for your mental survival, and explicitly recognize and validate the extra burden he will be taking on.
And to mitigate the mom guilt of missing events, they strategize. Organize a dedicated, highly engaging physical activity that the entire family does together every single weekend, like a long hike or a bike ride, to ensure high-quality connection time replaces the lost transit time. You solve the life problems so the fitness problems can be addressed.
And once those scales are balanced, you move to setting priorities. And there is a mandate in the behavioral literature that I think should be tattooed on the arm of every medical and fitness professional. Begin with client concerns.
That mandate represents a radical seismic shift away from the traditional medical model. The traditional model says the expert dictates the priority based on biological threat. But the behavioral model says the client's intrinsic motivation must lead the way.
Can you give an example of that?
There is a perfect scenario that illustrates this. Imagine a highly sedentary client comes to you. They have just received blood work showing severely elevated blood lipids and dangerous cholesterol levels. They are a walking cardiac event waiting to happen. But when they sit down with you, their primary stated concern is that they want to lift weights to tone up their arms for an upcoming high school reunion.
As a professional looking at those charts, your heart must be screaming, who cares about your triceps? You are going to have a heart attack. We need you doing intense cardiovascular conditioning immediately. Are you really supposed to ignore the life-threatening issue?
You don't ignore it permanently, but you absolutely subordinate it to their stated desire initially. The literature is explicit. Do not confuse what is important to you with what is important to your clients. If you force a grueling, sweaty, uncomfortable cardiovascular protocol on a client whose only emotional driver is the vanity of toning their arms, they will feel unheard, they will hate the process, and they will quit. And then their lipids will never improve.
So you use the vanity as a Trojan horse.
Exactly. The text advises that, assuming you monitor their safety and get medical clearance, you start them on the lightweight training they desire. You give them exactly what they want. You use their vanity or whatever their specific intrinsic motivation is to build momentum, to establish a habit of showing up, and to build self-efficacy.
Build the trust.
Once they trust you, and once they feel successful, then you gradually introduce the cardiovascular work they actually need. You win the psychological war first.
There is another brilliant example of this prioritization matrix involving a young athlete named Jay.
Jay's case is fascinating. He was a teenage athlete suffering from chronic fatigue, severe anxiety, and a completely deteriorating attitude. His parents brought him to a fitness professional expecting a physical solution, maybe a better conditioning program, or a new nutritional supplement stack to boost his energy.
But the counselor looked at the whole picture and realized a physical prescription was the exact opposite of what Jay needed.
The professional recognized that Jay wasn't physically weak. He was systemically overwhelmed. He was drowning in the demands of elite travel sports, advanced academic homework, and trying to maintain a teenage social life. He lacked the self-discipline of time management, so the intervention was entirely behavioral. The council pulled out a massive calendar and had Jay visually map out every single demand on his time. Then they forced him to execute a ruthless prioritization exercise, assigning a 1, 2, or 3 rating to every activity.
And I guarantee, because he's an anxious high achiever, Diz initially labeled every single thing as a priority 1.
Naturally. If everything is a priority, nothing is. But the counselor methodically worked with him, asking probing questions, forcing him to confront the reality of his limitations. They forced several items into the 3 category. And then came the intervention. They simply dropped all the 3s. Jay made the difficult decision to step down to a less demanding, lower-tier hockey team.
Which provided him not only with massive amounts of recovery time, but a profound psychological release valve. The ultimate fitness prescription for an overtrained athlete was actually less physical activity, driven by behavioral prioritization. That is true, holistic client-centered care. Okay, so we've balanced the scales, we've prioritized their actual emotional desires over our clinical agendas. Now we finally formulate the specific behavioral objectives. And to do this, behavioral science utilizes a very familiar acronym, but with one absolutely critical, game-changing modification: the SMART goal.
Almost everyone in the corporate or fitness world has been beaten over the head with the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timed. But advanced behavioral models, citing researchers like Francis, make a vital adjustment to that middle letter. They argue that attainable and realistic are functionally redundant. To say a goal is attainable is to say it is realistic. It wastes a letter. So they completely replace attainable with a much more powerful concept: action-oriented.
Action-oriented. Why is that shift so important psychologically?
Because it forces the objective to be anchored to a specific physical verb that the individual can clearly visualize themselves executing. Humans are terrible at pursuing abstract concepts. If a client says, "My goal is to get in shape," that's a terrible goal. Get in shape is a vague outcome, not an action. But if they say, "I will be running 3 miles in under 30 minutes, 4 days a week," that goal is specific, it is easily measurable, it is constrained by time, it is realistic, and most importantly, it is driven by the physical action verb, running.
Let's quickly audit the rest of that modified SMART framework to see how it operates in practice. Specific, we covered that. It must be narrow. Walk briskly for 2 miles instead of improve cardiovascular health. Measurable. This is easy for distance or weight, like 40 minutes, 4 days a week. But what if the client's goal is entirely subjective? What if their goal is, "I want to feel less exhausted all the time"? How do you measure a feeling?
That is a very common challenge. The behavioral literature offers 2 distinct ways to quantify subjective feelings. The first is subjective scaling. You simply establish a daily 1 to 10 rating scale, where the client logs their perceived energy level every morning and evening. Over a month, you have quantifiable data mapping a subjective experience. The second method is to define the behavioral evidence of the feeling. You ask them, if you truly felt less exhausted, what would you be doing differently? And they might say, "I would see my evening workout as a relaxing break rather than a chore, and I would actually have the energy to read a book after dinner instead of just collapsing in front of the television." Now you have concrete behaviors to measure against. If you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it.
Okay, we have specific, measurable, action-oriented. Then comes realistic.
To determine if an action is genuinely realistic, a counselor checks 3 boxes. 1. Are the physical resources available? Do they actually own winter running gear? Or is the gym open at the hour they plan to go? 2. Is the action fully under their locus of control? A goal of, "I will lose 5 pounds this week," is not entirely under their control, because water weight and hormones fluctuate. But "I will eat 4 servings of vegetables a day" is 100% under their behavioral control. And 3, does it align with their current high priorities?
And the final letter, timed. Establishing clear temporal boundaries.
Setting both short-term and long-term horizons is vital. But the literature heavily emphasizes the disproportionate importance of the short-term target. Successfully completing a very small short-term objective extremely early in the program, like simply completing 3 15-minute walks in week 1, ignites a psychological phenomenon called the cycle of challenge and achievement. It provides an immediate hit of dopamine and self-efficacy, which fuels the motivation required to tackle the slightly harder challenge in week 2.
So let's step back and look at what we've built. We have a beautifully crafted, highly personalized, stage-matched, emotionally balanced, action-oriented SMART strategy. The custom suit has been tailored to the exact millimeter. The client feels heard, understood, and motivated. The plan is flawless. Are we finally in the clear? Is the client guaranteed to succeed?
In a perfect world, yes. But in the unpredictable reality of human psychology, no. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most critical phase of the behavioral journey, the cautionary note. Because even with the most perfectly engineered plan, right at the precipice of action, right at the moment when the talking stops and the sweating is supposed to begin, massive psychological trapdoors violently swing open.
Because fundamentally, human beings are terrified of change, even positive change.
Exactly. Behavioral scientists refer to this as the cost of change. The sheer friction of altering a comfortable homeostasis is a massive deterrent. All that ambivalence that we thought we resolved in the contemplation stage, it will rear its head dramatically right at the moment of commitment. The nervous system panics at the thought of the impending discomfort. To protect against this, the counselor must be acutely aware of 4 major behavioral pitfalls that clients will unconsciously use to sabotage themselves at the 11th hour.
Let's expose these pitfalls because I guarantee everyone listening will recognize their own behavior in these. Pitfall number 1, skipping the foundational analysis and rushing to a decision.
This is the Suzanne scenario all over again. When motivation is high, there is immense pressure from both the client and the coach to just get moving and hit the gym floor. But if you yield to that impatience and skip the deep lifestyle audit, if you ignore the stages of change assessment, you are building a heavy structure on a foundation of sand. The moment the initial burst of motivation fades, the unaddressed lifestyle friction will cause the entire commitment to collapse.
Pitfall number 2, defensive avoidance.
Defensive avoidance is the art of rationalizing a delay. The client looks at the meticulously crafted, perfect plan. They agree it is exactly what they need, and then they say, this looks absolutely brilliant, but honestly, looking at my calendar, I have that huge quarterly report due at work next week, and my mother-in-law is visiting. It just makes more sense to wait until things calm down on the first of the month to really give this 100%.
Oh man, I have executed that exact maneuver so many times. I will start fresh on Monday. You agree with the plan entirely, which makes you feel like you are being proactive, but you kick the actual execution down the road to protect yourself from the immediate, visceral discomfort of having to change your behavior today.
It is a brilliantly deceptive defense mechanism. Which brings us to pitfall number 3, which is arguably the most insidious, because it masquerades as actual progress, seizing a comfortable short-term option.
This is the trap of substituting real action with consumer action.
Precisely. This is the phenomenon of translating the terrifying requirement of physical effort into a comfortable, enjoyable, but ultimately ineffective alternative behavior. The classic example is the individual who commits to a new running program, but instead of actually going outside and running a mile in their old sneakers, they decide the first step is to spend 3 hours researching and purchasing top-of-the-line carbon-plated running shoes online. They say, well, I need the right gear to prevent injury. I can start running next week when the shoes arrive in the mail. I love shopping for gear.
Yes. It is the illusion of momentum. You substitute the difficult, sweaty action, which is exercising with a highly dopaminergic consumer action buying gear that makes you feel like you are an athlete making progress without actually having to endure the friction of doing the hard work. You buy the identity without earning the capability.
It is a profound psychological deflection. And the fourth and final pitfall to watch out for is pushing before the client is truly ready to alter a lifestyle habit.
Which goes back to the stages of change.
Exactly. This is the error of suggesting a rigorous course of action simply because it is the gold standard medical recommendation, completely ignoring whether it is suitable for that specific complex human being at that specific vulnerable moment in their life. Pushing a highly resistant contemplator into a severe dietary restriction will not only fail, but it will damage their trust in you and their trust in themselves.
When I look at these 4 pitfalls, the rushing, the delaying, the shopping, the overwhelming pressure, it instantly reminds me of a very specific psychological analogy. It maps almost perfectly onto the bargaining flows of the grief cycle.
That is a fascinating parallel. Unpack that.
Think about it. When an individual is finally backed into a corner and faced with the undeniable reality of the hard, uncomfortable work they have to endure to change their body, to save their health, or to alter their life trajectory, it triggers a form of grief. They are actively grieving the impending death of their comfortable, familiar, effortless old habits. And their brain desperately, frantically tries to bargain its way out of the pain. It looks for a loophole. It looks for a shiny distraction, like new shoes. It begs for a delay tactic, like waiting until Monday. If the professional guiding them, or if you, attempting to be your own guide, does not possess the awareness to recognize that bargaining for exactly what it is, you will fall for the illusion. You will let them off the hook, or worse, you will get frustrated, push too hard, become a preacher, and shatter the rapport entirely.
That is a profoundly accurate analogy. The role of the counselor is not to drag them out of that grief or aggressively shut down the bargaining. The counselor's job is to sit quietly with them in the discomfort of that ambivalence. You gently point them back to the decision balance summary they wrote themselves. You remind them of their own stated, deeply personal wants. And you patiently, empathetically guide them to take that very first infinitesimally small, action-oriented step into the unknown.
Wow. We have traversed an absolutely immense, sweeping landscape of human psychology today. Let's take a moment to do a comprehensive wrap-up of the journey we've been on. We have deconstructed the entire activity counseling model from the ground up. We started by dismantling the illusion that generic, off-the-rack fitness prescriptions work, realizing that sustainable change requires the nuanced touch of a master tailor. We explored the devastating flaws of the preacher, director, and educator styles, and learned why the collaborative counselor approach is the only path that honors the client's emotional reality. We mapped the intricate mechanics of the communication loop, learning how to silence our internal noise, bypass our ingrained mental filters, and utilize the physical attending behavior of solar to build an unbreakable architecture of trust. We discovered the critical difference between validating a struggle and instinctively giving advice.
And from that foundation of trust, we learned how to gather the right data. We visualized the Venn diagram of human behavior, understanding that true success only lives in the tiny overlap of biological needs, emotional wants, and the unforgiving reality of a person's lifestyle. We learned how to use open questions, probing techniques, and softening language to uncover the hidden truth without triggering shame.
Oh, we recognize the profound necessity of mapping a person's total systemic stress through comprehensive audits. We learned to respect the immutable laws of the trans-theoretical model, understanding that you cannot force an action stage intervention onto a pre-contemplation mindset. We saw how to weigh the incredibly real losses of change against the gains, and why a counselor must always prioritize the client's intrinsic, sometimes vain desires over strict clinical urgency to build momentum. And finally, we learned how to forge action-oriented SMART goals while remaining hyper-vigilant against the last-minute psychological trapdoors of defensive avoidance and the illusion of consumer action.
It is, without a doubt, a comprehensive, profoundly humanistic blueprint for behavioral change. It operates on the fundamental truth that humans are infinitely complex, deeply emotional, and socially entangled creatures, not just biological machines passively waiting for a physical input.
It really is a masterpiece of behavioral science. And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. Throughout this entire hour, we have dissected this framework entirely through the lens of an interpersonal dynamic. We've talked about it as a fitness professional helping a struggling client. We've talked about trainers, clients, Jerry, Suzanne, Marg, and Jay. But what if you took this entire massive activity counseling model and turned the mirror around? What if you applied every single one of these psychological principles to yourself?
That is the ultimate, most powerful application of this material.
Think about it deeply. The next time you fail at a major goal, whether it is attempting to learn a complex new language, trying to get a side business off the ground, or yes, failing to stick to a new exercise routine, I want you to stop. Don't immediately default to the old, comfortable narrative of calling yourself lazy. Do not act as a judgmental preacher to your own mind. Instead, ask yourself the genuinely hard investigative questions. Was my goal actually matched to my true stage of change, or was I completely deluding myself, pretending to be in the action phase when I was really just paralyzed in contemplation? Did I honestly account for the deep, chaotic noise and friction in my own daily lifestyle? Or did I just write out a fantasy schedule for a version of myself that doesn't exist? Did I explicitly weigh the real losses I'd have to endure, like sacrificing an hour of relaxing television or missing out on social events against the anticipated gains?
Executing that level of introspection requires a staggeringly high degree of self-awareness. It means you have to fundamentally become your own counselor. You have to investigate your own resistance, your own excuses, and your own trapdoors with profound empathy, rather than crushing yourself with judgment.
Exactly. Stop walking into the department store and buying the generic off-the-rack suit for your own life and then getting angry when it doesn't fit. Be your own master tailor. Take the uncomfortable measurements, deeply respect the complex fabric of your daily reality, and build a customized plan that is actually designed to fit the life you are living right now.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly expansive, deep dive into the human mind. Keep questioning your own mental filters, be ruthlessly aware of that internal noise, and we will see you next time.